Rebounding hasn't been given the same importance it once had. Most modern fans consider it a lost skill, but that's certainly not true. We believe it's an important aspect of basketball, and that's why we're taking a look at the best rebounders of every decade since the NBA began back in the 1950s. Let's get started. Starting with the 1950s, Dolph Schayes. From 1950 to 1959, no one could match Dolph Schayes. The impressive Schayes led not only the rebounding category, but also the leading scorer for the decade. He was a part of the Syracuse Nationals, who would go on to become the Philadelphia 76ers. He averaged a minimum of 13.3 RPG and grabbed over 1,000 rebounds in the season 3 times. Without a doubt, he was the most sensational player of the 1950s, and he also won a championship with the Nationals in 1955. But he wasn't the only leading rebounder during that time. Another NBA legend, Larry Faust, was second on the list with 6,703 rebounds. Pretty decent, no doubt about it, but definitely not as good as Dolph Schayes' 8,413 rebounds. Henry Gallatin also was in the top 3 during the 50s for rebounds. He had 6,684 rebounds, but both Gallatin and Faust couldn't match the dominance of Schayes in terms of rebounds in the 1950s. After that, the 1960s, Wilt Chamberlain. If you thought Dolph Schayes' record was good, you might just gawk when you hear about the rebounds the legendary Wilt Chamberlain got during the 60s. Wilt's known as one of the greatest players of all time, and one of his greatest strengths was rebounding. He's also the all-time leading rebounder in the sport's history, with 23,924 total rebounds. In fact, when he started his career, Chamberlain was something of a rebounding machine. During his rookie season, the legend averaged 27 rebounds per game and would average 20 or more in the next 7 seasons, while also winning 7 scoring titles in a row. That tells you all you need to know about how special this fella was. In the 60s, though, Wilt came up with 19,112 rebounds, over twice as many as Dolph Schayes managed in the 1950s. But it wasn't like Schayes was underachieving. It was just that Chamberlain and his rival Bill Russell were completely on another level. Unsurprisingly, Russell's second on the list with 17,501 rebounds, and way back in third is Elgin Baylor, who couldn't make it past the 10,000 mark and ended with 9,786 rebounds for the entire decade. Up next, the 70s, Elvin Hayes. The 70s produced the closest rebounding races ever. The 2000s come close, but this one was simply sensational. Elvin Hayes out-rebounded the great Kareem Abdul-Jabbar by only 125 rebounds, and also beat his former teammate Wes Unseld by just over 1,000 rebounds. He ended the decade with 11,565 rebounds, and his skills helped the Washington Bullets win a championship in 1978. Hayes wasn't just a rebounder, though. He was one of the top 10 greatest power forwards in NBA history, and it's not a surprise that the secret behind his success was his rebounding. Over the entire decade, Hayes scored 14.2 RPG, which also included 3.5 offensive rebounds per game. The Bullets legend finds himself 4th on the all-time rebounds list too, with 16,279 career rebounds, with most of the damage coming during the 70s. But Kareem wasn't too far off Hayes either. He missed only by 125 rebounds, and given his all-time scoring record, this could have been a pretty decent feather in his cap. On to the 1980s, Moses Malone. Moses Malone, aka the chairman of the boards, was a monster when it came to rebounding. A 3-time MVP winner during his prime, Malone also won the Sixers a championship during the 80s and led the league in rebounds 5 years in a row. In fact, he also won a rebounding title in 1979, but misses the cutoff by just a year. Despite that, Malone's 10,269 rebounds are the highest in the 80s and are 2,000 more than the next player on the list, Robert Parrish. The race for second place was quite tight, to be fair, with Jack Sikma finishing third with 8,192 rebounds, only 3 behind Parrish. But this is all about Malone. The Sixers legend was averaging at least 10 RPG in a season for 15 out of the first 16 seasons, and he was a monster on the offensive glass too, going for 5 or more rebounds per game 9 times in his career. On the all-time list, Malone ranks behind Hayes in 5th place with 16,212 rebounds. If only he'd played a few more games. games. Then the 90s, Dennis Rodman. If you ask someone like Dennis Rodman, he'd tell you that rebounding is an art. In fact, he was obsessed with the skill and learned more about it in his free time, understanding the trajectory of the ball after it hit the rim, among other things. And in the 90s, Rodman mastered the art of rebounding like no one else had done. Statistically, many players recorded many more rebounds than Rodman, but his defensive rebounding dominance produced a massive impact as he played an important role in 5 championship runs during his career. Rodman's rebounding was at its best during the 90s, and he recorded over 1,500 more rebounds than Karl Malone, another insane rebounder of the 90s. It's crazy that someone would have produced better numbers than Karl Malone, let alone 1,500 more rebounds in a decade. Given the quality of the teams he played for, Rodman's role was also limited. He had to defend as if his life depended on it, and that meant he mostly produced these numbers with defensive rebounds rather than offensive ones. And third on the list is Hakeem Olajuwon, who came up with 8,000 rebounds during the 90s. Moving on to the turn of the century, the 2000s, Kevin Garnett. The 2000s were an incredible time to be an NBA fan. You had some of the greatest players of all time playing in that time period, some ending their careers, others starting, and a few in their prime. And that decade also produced some of the best rebounders we've ever seen. Kevin Garnett, in particular, was one of the best players of that decade, and his visibility in scoring and defending was amazing. He amassed 9,288 rebounds in the entire decade, but Tim Duncan was too far off Garnett. The Spurs legend came really close with one less than 9,000 rebounds. Garnett, though, deserves the plaudits. He won the MVP in 2004 before winning a ring with the Celtics and becoming the Defensive Player of the Year in 2008. Behind Garnett and Duncan was another underrated player of the 2000s, Ben Wallace, who grabbed 8,500 rebounds during the 2000s, only 700 or so short of Garnett. Entering the 2010s, DeAndre Jordan. Didn't see that one coming, did you? It's alright, we had to double check too. We really thought it would be Dwight Howard leading the rebounding charts during the 2010s, but no, it's actually DeAndre Jordan, and he has almost 600 more rebounds than Howard. During his time in Orlando, Howard was probably the most dominant rebounder in the league, but over the stretch of the entire decade, Jordan edges him by quite a few rebounds actually. A mainstay of the Clippers during the 2010s, Jordan was superb at grabbing rebounds, clearly. Of course, having more possession and a consistent role helped Jordan, but he truly came into his own during the 2013-14 season, where he averaged 13.6 RPG to lead the NBA. 2014-15 was even better, as he improved to 15 RPG and nearly 5 offensive RPG too. In the last 6 seasons of the decade, Jordan was still averaging over 14 RPG per game, and that helped him to All-NBA first-team selection in 2016. Meanwhile, third on the list is Andre Drummond, with 7,424 rebounds. Lastly, the 2020s, Rudy Gobert. Well, the 2020s are only a couple of years old, but leading the rebounding charts so far is Rudy Gobert, with 2,844 rebounds. Not too far behind him is the reigning MVP champion, Nikola Jokic, with 2,510 rebounds, and Jonas Valanciunas is third with 2,407 rebounds. This category, though, is definitely flawed, and it'll change quite a bit in the next 8 years before we see a leader. Gobert in particular is 30, and he might not enjoy similar numbers toward the back end of the 2020s, so that remains a bit of a concern too. But it wouldn't be a surprise if he adds to that lead, because he's joined a really good and quick Minnesota Timberwolves side. However, it was Jokic who led the league in rebounds over the course of last season and won the MVP too. This year, after a dozen games or so, Nikola Vucevic is the leading name in the rebound category, but this is an interesting one to observe. So who do you guys think will end with the most rebounds in the current decade? That's a wrap for this video. Do you think Wilt Chamberlain would average a similar number of rebounds in modern era basketball? Let us know in the comments below. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. See you at the next one.